We're going to wrap up this video series on the Reformation by looking at what were women's place in this Reformation and also what was a legacy that this Reformation left. So the Reformation produced mixed results regarding the position of women in society. Some of the improvements: women responsible for their own faith, the fact that ministers marry shows the value of women, women seen as leaders and educators of their children, and Protestant women involved in defending the faith, and the family was seen as the center of faith. So women benefited from the Reformation in that they were encouraged to take responsibility for their own faith. But the dissolution of the convents removed one of the few formal religious roles that women had been allowed to play. The Reformation also placed increased importance on women as spiritual leaders and teachers in their home, but still emphasized the subordination of wives to their husbands and more firmly tied women to traditional roles as housekeepers and childbearers. So we saw no improvement in that women are still not allowed to be ministers or hold church offices, women still viewed as subordinate to men, and women were more firmly locked into roles as housekeepers and childbearers. In the year after the Council of Trent, Charles V is going to aim to remove Protestant influence in the Holy Roman Empire. And he's going to do this by outlawing an alliance of Lutheran princes called the Schmalkaldic League. He warred with the League for about a year and defeated it handedly. The treaty ending the war, the Peace of Augsburg, brought a temporary end to these hostilities, but it's not going to resolve the problem of religious differences, nor is it going to put an end to religious persecution. It did, however, formally allow Lutheranism to exist in the empire, and this codifies the ability of a territory's ruler to determine the faith of its people. This acceptance of Lutheranism didn't mean that people had religious freedom, since they still had to worship as their ruler did. And the wars of religion that followed the Reformation demonstrated that serious divisions threatened Europe still existed. Because Luther, Calvin, Henry VIII, and others had closely tied together religion and politics, the Reformation opened the door for political leaders to play an increased role in religious issues. And in many ways, the Protestant Reformation actually narrowed the gap between church and state. And people begin to see an opportunity of their leader to choose religion as a chance to assert the uniqueness of their country and the value of their own personal identity, as opposed to being part of a unified Catholic empire. So this last point here, it increases the autonomy and independence of countries and allows them to be unique and be themselves and not part of a larger empire and absorbed into that. In 1905, German sociologist and economist Max Weber wrote The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. In this book, he puts forth his thesis that a strong connection existed between the Protestant work ethic and the development of capitalism. He argued that modern capitalism found its roots in early Protestant communities like Calvin's Geneva that placed a high value on work and the results of one's work. Early Protestantism also offered a different conception of the nature of labor, viewing it as something that should be freely given by the laborer and not coerced, made to do it, and as it had been in feudal arrangements. And Luther also offered a new conception of work, portraying it as valuable and not something to be avoided or done half-heartedly. He suggested that all hard work was valuable, and each person should be content and work diligently at their job, regardless of what it is. With the Reformation, both Catholics and Protestants are going to place an increased emphasis on education and literacy. And this just makes sense, because if we can read the Bible and we can know what it says for ourselves, then we can protect ourselves against abuses of the church. So the Reformation also led many to view certain traditional customs as disruptive and unnecessary. Protestants in particular encouraged elimination of such superstitions as placing a wedding ring on each finger or baptizing babies 3 times in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Protestants allowing clergy to marry increased the perceived value of family and marriage. Protestantism viewed the family as a center of life and stressed that the love that spouses should have for each other. Although women were still viewed as subordinate to their husbands, on the whole, the treatment of women in marriages improves. So greater value is placed on the contributions of women as spouses and mothers, and Luther and other reformers argued that women should be active in both spiritual and temporal affairs. And though more than half of Europe still remained Catholic by the end of the Reformation, the earlier unity that Catholicism had created was gone for good. The Reformation doesn't resolve all the problems that had plagued the Catholic Church, but it did bring them to the forefront for discussion and debate. The Reformation had a wide reaching impact and affected the religious, political, economic, and social fabric of Europe. Its most prominent result may have been the creation of new Christian sects, many of whom still exist today in some form or another, or we can trace our roots back to the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation also had a major impact on the Catholic Church and European monarchies and social structures. The quote on the slide highlights Luther's beliefs in the importance of pursuing truth, even if it means turning the world upside down to do so, which was a fitting summation of the goals of the Reformation. And while it didn't generate an immediate resolution of the issues, it says that the church struggled with the Reformation proved to be a long-lasting movement whose effects can still be seen in contemporary society. Peace, if possible, truth at all costs, and that's attributed to Martin Luther. We had some discussion questions over this. These are your last questions. Again, if you have any questions about how to answer these or need help, feel free to contact me, ask me in class, and I'll be more than happy to do so. Number 1, in what ways did the Reformation strengthen the role of monarchs and other secular rulers, as well as the power and authority of secular governments? Number 2, many historians have said that the Reformation encouraged both a spirit of capitalist enterprise and greater emphasis on the individual conscience and the freedom of the individual. Why do you think these historians see these things as results of the Reformation? And lastly, number 3, overall, do you think that the Protestant Reformation benefited women, harmed them, or did little to alter their lives in any significant way? And explain your answer. Remember to justify it using something that supports your answer from what you've heard in these PowerPoints.